Welcome to this week's deep dive video. I might sound a little off because I am still fighting a cold, so I hope that's not too distracting this week. Now, we've been going through our series Heroes, and we've spent the past 2 weeks looking at the life of Esther. And I wanted to share with you something that I don't often get to. This past week, I got a phone call from a friend who has been teaching through the book of Esther, and he called and he said, "Cole, I don't know if you've studied Esther recently, but..." And he shared with me that as he was teaching through, one of the guys in his class asked this question, and I thought it was great. So 2 things I wanted to share with you. One, I get to have those conversations. I think it's super cool. God does these incredible things while we're teaching through Esther. He's teaching through Esther, and then we get to discuss together. That's something, that's hard to plan and orchestrate, but God, it's nothing for him to bring us together. And so really cool. And then I wanted to share with you that question because I think it's one that maybe we wrestle with, or if we haven't yet, I think it's important that we do. So this student of his said, in Esther chapter 2, verse 10, which is where they were at reading, and I'll read that for you here. It says, Esther had not revealed her nationality and her family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. So Mordecai, her cousin, who has raised her, forbids her to share who she is. Don't share your nationality or your relationship to me, Mordecai says. And so the student asked, how does that fit with the New Testament? Because in the New Testament, Paul tells us that we're not supposed to be ashamed. He tells us in Romans chapter 1, he's not ashamed of the gospel. This is the good news. He's not ashamed of it. He's not ashamed of Jesus. He's going to tell anyone and everyone he can. So how does Esther keeping her identity as a Jew fit with that? How is that good, wise counsel? And then the second thing was in Colossians 3, we're told to do everything we can as if we're doing it for the Lord. Colossians 3 says, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. And how do those 2 things fit with this command for Mordecai to Esther? Don't share that you're a Jew with the people around you. Don't share that you even know me. Keep those things to yourself. And I think the first question we have to ask in answering his question, or this student's question, is why might Mordecai give Esther this advice? And we talked in our series that Mordecai, he's Jewish and he is working in the king's court. He's an advisor to the king, not a high-level advisor. He spends most of his time waiting to be summoned. But Mordecai has seen this kind of drama that can happen in this environment where people are scheming and plotting against one another to get ahead. And he doesn't want her to share that she knows him. Mordecai doesn't want Esther to get caught up in that mess that he could pull her into just by their being related. Also, he is very well aware that there are many who are in positions of influence and power in the Persian Empire who hate the Jewish people. These are historic feuds that have been raging for centuries. And he knows that if people in power that have the king's ear know she is a Jew, that will likely not work out well for her, that will work against her. So Mordecai commands her, he forbids her to share any of those things. But then we still have to wrestle with this idea of how do you keep those things a secret today? Esther, she had some practical reasons, but shouldn't she still be firm and confident and excited in her identity as one of God's people? And how does that fit? And I think it's maybe in some ways easier to understand than we would often want to allow it. In other ways, maybe more difficult. So one of the things we see, Esther's relationship with God was not hindered in this. She wasn't actually ashamed of God. She just kept it quiet because she was being wise. This advice from Mordecai was to live this out practically, but not to boast it or proclaim it. She was being very wise. We see that she didn't turn her back on God or live contrary to how God called her to live, that she continued to pray and worship. We see throughout the rest of Esther's story. So she was praying and fasting. She was maintaining a relationship with God. Her identity is one of God's children, but she wasn't boasting it. She wasn't proclaiming it to people around her. And she may have not even owned it. We don't have an example of this coming up, but she may not have even owned it if she was confronted with it, because it could have cost her deeply. And the advantage to owning it wouldn't have furthered God's kingdom. So we see that Esther was told by Mordecai, hey, keep these things to yourself. Don't share these things, because the cost would have been great. Now, again, her identity was as a Jewish person, a child of God, or one of God's chosen people, and she was in this place. We see that God continued to boost her in this role and utilize her in this role, even though she wasn't openly proclaiming him. Now, I think one of the reasons this student may have struggled, and maybe you're struggling with this, is I think we often have this idea of, Jesus says, if you profess me or confess me before men, I will confess you before the Father. I will profess you before the Father. I will own you as one of mine in front of the Father. And I think we have this idea of we have to walk around declaring on a megaphone that we are following Jesus, that we are followers of his. We're Christians, we're saved, we're redeemed. My Facebook feed is flooded with all these, I believe that the 10 Commandments are God's design for man, and I'm not ashamed, or I'm a follower of Christ and I'm not ashamed to share 10 times or whatever if you too are not ashamed, and we see all these things where we feel like we have to declare it and boast it to be a follower. And we read that passage in Colossians and we see do everything, so when I hold the door open at the grocery store, I've got to say, well, that was for Jesus, because I didn't do that for you, I did that because I love Jesus. And we get this weird misunderstanding. I've got to wear these punny Christian t-shirts to be a good follower because everyone's got to know that I am his. And I think it comes from a good place, but I think it's often misplaced. We have this idea that our identity has to be proclaimed, and the problem is we often see a lot of hurt happen that way. And I don't mean that in some modern thing here where everybody's too sensitive and they need to grow up. I mean that in a sincere way. So when I served for a summer up in Wyoming on the Wind River Reservation with the Arapaho and the Shoshone, one of the things we were advised by people who lived in that community for a long time is to not go in saying you were a Christian. And I really struggled with that because I thought, oh man, so they've had bad experiences with Christians. Let me be a good experience with a Christian. So my first thought or my first inclination was to go in proclaiming myself as a follower of Christ, as a Christian, and then show them not everyone is like their past experiences. Because if you study history, some terrible things have been done in Jesus' name. They were not of him. They were not actually for him or in accordance with his will for his people, but they had his name slapped on it. And there are people that hate Jesus because of people who bore his name. And that was the advice given to me, was don't carry that label. Now, I was blessed enough that enough people told me that same thing, that my heart had it sunk in, and I learned to just live as Christ called me to live and let my actions speak for themselves, so that when it came time and I had an opportunity to share the good news, they did not doubt the good news because of how I had been living. And I don't mean that they bought it instantly, that they were like, oh man, that makes total sense. You've been a nice guy all summer. Obviously I'm going to follow Jesus. No, that's not the experience I had. What I mean is we often live in such a way that people doubt the good news because we are poor messengers. You see, in Esther, she didn't go around saying, I'm a Jew, you should trust me because I'm a Jew. Our God says that I'm not supposed to lie, and so I'm not going to lie to you. She didn't go around saying anything like that, but she lived a trustworthy life. She lived and was regarded as someone who was wise. And so when she came to the king and said that your most trusted advisor, that friend of yours, Haman, who is sitting here, he has tricked you, he has worked against you, and he's even plotting to take my life. He's working against the man who saved your life. He's trying to kill not only him and me, but all my people, and I wouldn't bother you with something if it were petty, but this is huge. And she had lived in such a way that when she came to the king with this news of treachery and pointed to a villain, that the king believed her. That she was believable because of how she had lived previously. We need to live in such a way that when we come bringing life-changing news, you can't follow Christ and live the same yesterday or today as you did yesterday. It's constantly moving toward him. And sometimes those are big leaps and sometimes those are small steps. But you can't stay the same. Scripture says you're a new creation when you're in him. You cannot stay the same. And so we have to live in such a way that when we, as the messengers of this good news, have an opportunity to bring it, people don't doubt it because we lived poorly, but that we have added credibility to the message because we have lived well. We have proven ourselves to be trustworthy. We have proven ourselves to be good workers. I know men and women who have owned businesses and who attend church, and then in their literature for their businesses have included that they're Christians, and other people have gone to them and become their customers because of this relation, but then found their work to be questionable. That the products they bought from them or the work that was done for them was not to a good standard. And what starts to happen in the community is not only does this business get a poor reputation, but because they put Christ's name on it, Christ starts to get a bad reputation. If this is how his followers are, I don't want to be a part of him. I want nothing to do with him. And I would encourage you to learn from Esther's example. You do not have to proclaim it. Please, many of us need to stop proclaiming it on Facebook because we're living where we think we're fulfilling our duty and following Christ by putting these things out there, by sharing with people at the store. Well, I did this because I'm a Christian. Let your actions speak for themselves. And if you have an opportunity to share the good news, let your actions live as a defense of that good news. You don't have to proclaim everywhere you go that you are his. Live in such a way that when you have the opportunity to tell people you are his, they don't doubt it, they don't hate him, and they don't resent you. That's my encouragement for you this week, that we would learn from Esther as we close out our study on her and her life. I pray that you would learn from her amazing story, that we would be wise as Esther was wise, that we would navigate this life well, that when people hear the good news we bring, they not doubt it because we're poor messengers. I hope that you're here this Sunday. We're going to talk about two people, not necessarily a villain, but we have a hero, and we're going to contrast them with someone faced with the same choice, but that took a different path. And we're going to talk about being heroic often is a choice. You don't normally just get thrust into moments of being a hero. You seek it. You live it out. You take the opportunity when it comes. And so I pray to see you Sunday. I hope to see you Sunday. I'm excited, and hopefully my cold's gone by then and I didn't share it with any of you. I don't think it's transmissible by video, so you should be fine. We'll see you Sunday.